Everybody, and welcome to the fourth of a series of 5 short webinars on privacy enhancing technologies. So for those of you who don't know, and I'm sure most of you do if you've attended the other 3 webinars we've had, my name is Jane Leakes. I manage the Newton Gateway to Mathematics, which is the impact initiative of the Isaac Newton Institute for Mathematical Sciences. So the Institute is the UK's National Institute for Mathematical Sciences research programmes and attracts researchers from all over the world, but currently at the moment not. Because of the situation we find ourselves in. So we'll be moving things online in the very near future. So we were established in 2013, and the Gateway is a knowledge intermediary for mathematical sciences. So we basically help extend the impacts of maths to all potential users. That's academic disciplines, business, industry, and the public sector. And we do this through various activities. An example of that is the one that we're doing today. So today's webinar is on end users' perspectives, and it features Mark Craddock from GCATI and previously UN Global Platform on Big Data, which I think will be discussed a bit more shortly. Matt Lowe, also from the Financial Conduct Authority, and Nigel Smart from KE Leuven. And unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, the National Nuclear Laboratory are unable to join us. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Nigel Smart, who is going to be running this session. Thank you.
Hello there. Right, so we've got 2 people with us today. So what we've done in the previous sessions is we've looked at what privacy enhancing technologies are. So this time what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at it from and we've been looking at it from the point of view of the technologists, the companies selling this stuff. So what we're going to be doing this time is looking at it from the other perspective, which is the people who want to use this stuff. So we've got 2 experts here who have been using this stuff. But before we go to those, just to recap for everybody, so everyone's on the same page. In the first 3, we discussed multi-party computation, which is allowing people to, in some sense, to get together to compute something securely without revealing their data. Homomorphic encryption, which allows you to, some sense, outsource data. Zero knowledge proofs, which allow you to prove that you've done some computation correctly without revealing the data that you used in your computation. And one of maybe the things that we missed is that we didn't cover technique because we didn't have enough time, is differential privacy, which is a technique where you output some answer, but the answer itself reveals information about the private values of what you want to keep secret. So you add some, in some sense, random noise to your answer to try and protect it. So we kind of, I think we might actually end up talking a little bit about differential privacy today, given where we're going. But without further ado, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Mark and Matt, who can introduce themselves and their organizations. So let's go first with Mark to introduce himself and your organization and your background.
Yeah, so I'm Mark Craddock. I'm the co-founder of GCATI, so it's a training certification organization, global organization, and that we kind of spun that off from the work we were doing at the United Nations. So we worked on building a big data platform for the statistics organizations across the world, 194 countries, and as part of that big data platform, we looked at the homomorphic encryption, differential privacy, etc., and we developed a handbook for the industry, the stats industry, and thanks Nigel and Dan for getting involved in that. Yeah, it did make a big difference. Yeah, and I guess when we started 2 years ago, there wasn't any awareness of these crypto techniques at all, and now across the statistic industry, they're all kind of talking about it, and they're all kind of demanding to get access to tools and techniques. But we can talk about that a bit more in a minute. Yep.
Exactly. Yeah, I'll be posting in a second a link to the various things people are talking about, so in the chat. So keep open the chat, and you've got some links there. Matt, over to you.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Matt Lowe. I work in the innovation division at the Financial Conduct Authority. The Financial Conduct Authority is the financial regulator for the UK, and we have within our innovation division we have lots of different services that we offer. And one of them is like a tech sprint model where we explore different technologies and see how that they could be implemented to solve stuff like maybe money laundering or financial crime. So yeah, our interest in privacy enhancing technologies, I guess, stems from, we think that data sharing amongst institutions is really important in terms of trying to combat money laundering or financial crime. So yeah, we explored a tech sprint or a hackathon in 2019, which was looking at privacy enhancing tech and how we can actually unlock some of that data sharing issue.
Cool. Okay, so I'll post some links in a minute to do with financial crime and the UN report, so everyone can be up to speed and you can read those at your leisure later on. If you've got any questions to the panelists or just like general questions, please put them in the Q&A and not the chat, because I can't keep open all the windows to see them. But let's go over to Mark first. And basically, we kind of mentioned this UN data thing. What was it? What you did in the report, and what you learned from you talked to a lot of people in this space, and you got a lot of people together, and you had meetings. I think one was in Colombia or something. You were talking about this. So what did you learn and about the technologies and, in some sense, barriers to adoption?
Yeah, so just a quick cap on what the platform is. So across the world in the statistic organizations, they currently use lots of surveys to create official statistics. And they can see the private sector using, machine learning techniques and AI techniques to create statistics in a, much faster, quicker, efficient way. And they want to, they see themselves, they see that as a bit of a threat. So they don't want to become, they still want to have a purpose. So they set up a working group 5 years ago under the UN Statistics Organization to look at big data to create official statistics. So it's interesting that, around the world, they call this new forms of data, and we know big data has been around for a long time. And the problems with big data is you don't own it. Yeah, it's owned by the private sector in general. So the problems with getting access, there's problems getting access to big data. And when I started working on the platform, when we started building the platform, we started looking at these techniques to make it easier to get access to this data. So, for example, I guess we went to every single continent and we talked about this, and we presented information on the different techniques at a high level. And then, there was more demand for kind of, what is this stuff? How do we use it? So that's where we got together, got Nigel involved, and Dan and Dave Archer, and quite a few others. And we basically wrote a handbook on these techniques and how it would apply to statistic organizations. And there's lots of kind of like slideware around from vendors at the time saying, this is the silver bullet, it's going to fix all your problems. You'll be able to work with the private sector. These techniques are going to solve everything. But at the time, a couple of years ago, that wasn't the case. And I guess at the time, now it's getting closer to that now. There are more products and services out there that can support these kind of techniques. And something we'll talk about later is, the DCMS now looking to use those techniques for online harms. So we ran these, conferences. We went out to Colombia, Malaysia, the US, China. I went to China twice. So they're all interested in these techniques. And the challenge is to get to share this data. And so we looked at using these techniques for the platform. And I think, at the time, a couple of years ago, there wasn't much awareness, and now there is. And I think we were, from my point of view, we were kind of lucky because we were at ONS in Newport. And I started looking around at this technique. Who can help us with this? Oh, and it turns out, one of the world leading guys is just literally across the water in Bristol. Yeah. So we got Nigel in to come and speak to us. And at ONS, and did a really good presentation. And I think, at the time, some people just didn't believe this was even possible. These kind of techniques existed. You cannot analyze data and have it still encrypted. It's impossible. But we know that's possible now. We've moved on a lot from that. So I guess it's a big background. Yeah.
What value can you unlock with this for various governments? Because UN's about governments, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Had a really good example from sub-Saharan Africa. So we could talk about that. It'd be really cool.
Yeah. So there's data's used for various techniques across creating statistics. So mobile phone data, mobile phone position data is used a lot for tourist statistics. So we know, for example, the UK people, when they go to the Netherlands, we go to Amsterdam, the Germans go all over the Netherlands, and the French go to Antwerp. Yeah. And that statistics produced by,
the French, if they go to Holland, do not go to Antwerp, because Antwerp is not in Holland.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay.
I know this now. Okay, carry on. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, you can produce those statistics using mobile phone data. It's also used for tourism in Mexico, so they know where people go, and that's used for policy investment. Where do they invest the money to support tourists? It's used for migration. So, most people that are, displaced across the world, they're not poor. They do have money. They do have mobile phones, and you can track the migration of people, and you can see the paths, up from Africa, up through, Greece and Italy, and across Europe, and you can spot the paths and the movement of people. It's also used for population. So generally, in the evenings, people are at home and they got the mobile phones, so you can see where the population is in the evenings. And then you can also use it for transport statistics, because you can see where mobile phones are moving around. Yeah.
Well, so it looks like that looks like really like basically governments want to spy on their people, but obviously you want to do this in a privacy preserving way. So what value do governments get out of knowing that some people are at home? Where is the unlocked value there? Yeah.
So just to be clear, so majority of statistic offices globally are not government. They fall under the parliamentary system. Yeah. So they're independent of government. Yeah. In general, they hold government to account. And we saw this, in the UK with the government producing their COVID statistics. And then the Office for National Statistics came out with a different set of figures and said, hang on a minute, you want to go and check your figures. They're not quite right. Yeah. And they put more rigor in, and they're independent of government. Yeah. So and when the statistic offices work on data, they're not interested in the individual at all. They're interested in aggregate statistics. Yeah. So if we know where the population are, then we know how many people are in that area, and that gets into funding and and policy decisions, and it also it supports the boundaries for elections, local and national. The population data, the migration data is also used by the UN for supporting migration and making sure they've got the right support in the right areas.
So you kind of know where the refugees are. So
know where the refugees are. Make sure there's enough support.
The refugees, cool, yeah.
Yeah, and the transport statistics obviously used for monitoring transport, where to build roads, are there enough roads, is there congestion, etc. So so there's lots of decisions made from this. And I guess one of the biggest things that came out of the global platform was we streamed hundreds of millions of data from flights and ships. So where are the ships, where are the flights, and all this data is kind of open because it's broadcast by radio and it gets aggregated by a few people globally. That data on ship movements and flights was streamed in the platform, and I can remember being in the office on March, and a call came in and said, right, what's this COVID thing, what's the impact going to be to the UK? And the Office for National Statistics and the Data Science Campus used the UN Global Platform. We could see live movement of ships, and we could see the trade wasn't coming out of China because they were in kind of lockdown and they couldn't move. We could see where the flights were going from China, mainly to Korea and other cities, countries. And that data was analysed, sent back into the Bank of England, the Cabinet Office, and the Treasury, and then they can look and make some decisions about how to deal with this. Now, back in the crash in 2008, the financial crash, every week it took ONS to provide the official statistics on the crash to the UK government, cost our economy £1 billion, the UK economy. And it took 12 weeks to produce those figures. Yeah. So it cost the economy 12 billion. So this time, using the platform, those figures were kind of produced over the weekend. They were refined, over a period. There's a team worked tirelessly over the weekend, and those figures were kind of provided in a few days. So basically, it saved the economy, at least 12 billion. Yeah,
that's cool. That's really cool. So obviously, you've moved away from the UN Global Platform, and you're now in this organisation, GCATI. Or
GCATI, GCATI.
GCATI. That's kind of I don't know how to pronounce that. So this is focused on training. So obviously you've seen training is a big impediment to uptake of technology. So do you see that as the?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I guess specifically in the statistics institutes, they've got people, the level of maths and analytics is high. The ability to do statistics is high. Their capabilities in implementing these techniques is very low. Yeah, and there's an official report that came out from the UN saying the skills in data science and analyzing kind of big data is poor. And then if you look at the techniques, homomorphic and multi-body computation and differential privacy, that's really low as well. Apart from in the US, which are using differential privacy for their census. Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant, because that was going to be my next thing. Talk about Census. I've got this list of things I want to talk about. Like in previous weeks, it's almost like it's a planned thing that you kind of like get to the point. So clearly, this is useful in Census, and we know that the US has been using differential privacy, and there's issues to do with, can you make the census data more easily accessible to people? So what are the applications in Census, and how's this going to help?
Yeah, so I guess there's a great video from John Boyd, who's the chief scientist there, or chief, I can't remember his exact role, but he's the main man, right, looking at this. And basically, what they talk about is the utility of data, right? So there's this kind of graph, yeah? And one end you've got the data can be used by everybody for every purpose, yeah? And at the other end, it can't be used for anything. And it's kind of this curve. And the other side is, how open is the data. So if it's completely open, you can use it for every purpose, so every utility. If it's completely closed, you can't use it for nothing. Yeah, and there's a sweet spot in between. And they've done the work, using differential privacy, so they can publish the census data. So there's going to be more utility of the data going forward in the US. John Boyd, they did some analysis internally with other sources of data, and they were able to identify with the current data that's published from the 2010 census, I think about 63% of the individuals, combine it with other sources of data. But using differential privacy, they don't expect that to be anywhere near that. So generally, there's concerns of, well, is differential privacy secure or not? Well, actually, the data you've got already is not secure, because you can identify 63% of the people, and if you've got the right techniques, you can do that. But using differential privacy, you can actually protect the individuals and their identities. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so before we turn on to Matt, to segue into what Matt's going to talk about, can you also talk about the application in crime fighting and potential applications there that you've been recently looking at?
Yeah, so I'm doing some work with the police and DCMS, or previously with DCMS, and basically, so DCMS owns the safety tech industry within the UK, and safety tech industry are looking at tools, or they have tools and techniques to protect bullying online, and also to scan the kind of bad images that are out there. So there was a tender released by DCMS last month, 2.4 million. And as part of that tender, they want to build some prototypes looking at how to make this data available, but in a safe way. But you can still do analytics on it, because you want to be able to identify if someone's using an ego image. Yeah. For example. So they specifically asked for these techniques, homomorphic multi-party computation. There's a 2.4 million.
So that kind of goes into what Rand was talking about 2 or 3 weeks ago, of using homomorphic encryption to analyze images using neural networks, where you have this image that is of illegal image that you shouldn't really have on a computer, and you can analyze this without actually the plod having to actually see the image and get things. Cool. Right. So that is really good. So we kind of got to crime fighting. So weirdly, we've got someone from the Financial Conduct Authority to talk to us about crime fighting. That's not normally, we don't normally associate finance with crime fighting. So please tell us about how you're doing, Matt, how you're doing crime fighting, and how this technology fits into that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nigel. I'm just put the caveat out there. I'm not the actual crime fighter. We're more of an ideas factory, but yeah. Anyway, the way that the FCA is kind of approaching this issue around financial crime and money laundering is that we're all aware that banks sits on a lot of that data, and the way that they operate at the moment, they've got like their transactional data sets, and they also have a lot of KYC data and a bit of an idea about who some of the bad actors would be. So so what we've been sort of exploring is how we can, I guess, unlock the sharing of that data. Because I'm not sure if anybody on the call is aware of this, but money laundering is a really big problem in terms of like how much it impacts the world, and whether that's through child slavery, or whether it's through human trafficking. It actually, the scale of the problem is about 1.6 trillion US dollars, and that's laundered through the system every year. And at the moment, we're only detecting around about 1% of that. So, that the benchmark is really low in terms of how much we're actually detecting as I guess as a financial services across the whole globe. And I mean, to put it that in other ways, you could see that that's in terms of GDP, you know, it's about the 11th rated country in the world in terms of GDP. So, you know, we see it as a really big problem that we're trying to unlock. And I guess when we've spoken to industry, we've asked them, okay, what if we're trying to solve the problem of money laundering? What's the way that we should tackle it? And when we held the series of roundtables back, I think in October 2017 or so, it was quite a while ago. They come up with, I guess, 3 main things that we need to focus on. One of them was around digital ID. So how are we better at actually determining who the individuals are, who they say they are? Another one was about changing culture. So there is like this cultural element of actually, you know, how do we work together across industry, across regulators, across government to try and solve these problems? And also, I guess the final one, which we thought we could actually try and pick up on, was the sharing of data. So how do we share data amongst either regulators, or how do we share data amongst institutions so we can actually get better at detecting money laundering? So privacy enhancing technologies was something that we're quite keen on exploring. So we have this, what we call a tech sprint, which people probably not familiar with the term tech sprint, but it's essentially like a hackathon where we get together the industry experts, data scientists, we get the data privacy enhancing tech experts in the room, and then we get them to form into teams and try and solve a particular problem over 3 or 4 days. So,
yeah, I was there in London for that one. That I was very impressed because I was there on the last day, and you had I think it was about six teams working on different aspects. You know, what did you learn from that day? What did you learn? What did you think was the cool things that teams came out with? And give some application, you know, ideas of how this tech was used to solve these problems.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing that we learned is there seems to be some perception that there's a tension between GDPR and financial crime legislation. So what we're trying to do is unlock that puzzle and say, well, no, there's not really an issue here if you use the right technology. So the first thing we learned that there wasn't really a tension. If you do use privacy enhancing technologies in a certain way, you can actually protect the individual's privacy, and also you can find out where the bad actors are. So we kind of proved that was something that is achievable. In terms of the teams, the teams are working on. We actually had 10 teams in the end, actually, not 6, but it was we were working with different types of privacy enhancing tech. So there was some people working on homomorphic encryption. There were some teams that work on zero knowledge proof, or there's some that might be working on multi-party computation. Some of them are actually merging a few of those different technologies together to try and solve the problem. And what we did is we provided them with a whole heap of data sets, which had like, I guess, transactional data, which we'd actually put in financial crime typologies in there. And we also had like a customer data set, which had flags against certain bad actors in there. And this is all completely synthetic, by the way. There was no real data in there because we still wanted to make sure we're being safe when we're playing with these sorts of technologies. And yeah, so some of the teams are using that either, they might be using, as an example, they might be using zero knowledge proof in the KYC space to test the network to see whether or not there's a bad actor who has already sprung up in, say, another financial institution. And you can test the network to see whether or not that there's a red flag against this person who you think might be a bad actor before you onboard them. So we saw a bit of that. We also saw a bit of like using, I guess, federated learning as well across the whole range of transactional data sets to get an understanding about the sort of network behaviors that are happening. So when we created the synthetic data sets, we created 6 separate fictional UK banks, but we had like seeded in a network of behavior within those 6 banks, because when you're a bank, you only see your particular transaction set, right? So
yeah.
what we try to do is like, okay, if we can test out the whole network, are we able to pick up on some of those other bad actors who we might not have seen previously? Yeah.
So I mean, so maybe one thing that maybe the audience don't understand is that these teams were not like academic teams. These were, the major companies in the financial space. These were people who, if you're technologists on this call, companies that they would have heard of, that we've even interviewed on already in this series. There was Cybernetica there. We had people from what was going to become Zama. We had Infer, Envale, so all of all of the names in the space. So these were really people who really want to make products in the space. Did any of these like 1 week planning things turn into POCs? Do you know, or eventual a long-term working with the financial industry?
Yeah, so it was really promising when we first came out of the tech sprint. There was a lot of POCs that had come out. They wanted to continue doing their work. And I guess another thing about a tech sprint is we're trying to pull in together not just the people who are the technologists who work with these technologies, but also bringing the industry experts who can help them actually build products. So we did start to see a few of the teams start to form around their solutions and then start to evolve them a little bit. But one of the things that we kind of always noted from our tech sprint model is that we have this issue of going from proof of concept to proof of value, where as soon as the tech sprint's over, we completely decommission everything. So we decommission the environments; they no longer have access to the data. So what we have found, and I'll probably talk a little bit this into the digital sandbox work, is that because we decommission everything, it's really difficult to keep those proof of concepts going. And we have seen other proof of concepts spun up off the back of the tech sprint. I'm aware of some other work that's happening, say sharing legal entity identifiers across a network, and there's some really good proof of concepts that have come out as a result of that, but not specifically around, I guess, some of the teams that we were working with. But we still have a close relationship with a lot of these privacy enhancing technology companies, and they're now working in the digital sandbox. But yeah, essentially what we've found is that we needed to have these environments sort of always there, and they need access to these data sets so that they can then take that to either an investor or to an incumbent bank and say, look, here, we've already proved this technology works. The regulators, we can't endorse the product, but it's been tested in a safe environment. ICO have also had a look, and everybody's kind of comfortable. Are we then comfortable to start implementing that, say, within your organization?
So you've mentioned this sandbox or sandpit or however what you want to do. So what are you actually doing with this sandbox at the moment?
Yeah, so we've just launched the digital sandbox, and we have currently got approximately 30 teams working within it, and it's what people who work in technology probably understand the digital sandbox to be. We've given them environments where they can work together. We've given them a place where they can actually still have contacts with the industry. People can come in and be a mentor. So you kind of get the feel of a tech sprint where that's usually done physically, trying to do that in a digital environment. So we've set up places where teams can showcase some of their work. As I said, they've got access to these data assets, which they don't usually have access to. So we've given them banking data sets. We've given them SME lending data sets, depending on the use case that we're looking to go after. We still have a financial crime use case in there, and privacy enhancing technology still plays is still playing a role in that. So we have approximately, I think, 5 teams who are working with pets in the sandbox. It's all there, so anybody can join. It's a bit of a free ride to come in and observe. So if you wanted to go and find out more about these technology companies that are working in there, you can go to www.digitalsandboxpilot.co.uk. Then there's a self-registration process, and then you can see, I guess, all the technology that's happening at the moment.
Okay, so thank you very much. That's really cool. If anyone's got any questions, if you can post them in the Q&A. Already in the chat, I posted some links to what Mark was talking about, which was the UN report on privacy preserving techniques. There's also an interesting report that I put there from the Royal Society in this space. And then there's stuff from the Financial Conduct Authority, which is exactly about this tech sprint. And some RUSI, that's the Royal United Services Institute, easier to say RUSI than Royal United Services Institute, has done some work in the space on discussions to do with privacy preserving analysis, specifically financial crime. They're really interested in financial crime. Okay, so over to the two of you, Matt and Mark. So both of you have been exposed and have used these tech. So what do you see as the impediments? What are the problems going forward that stop this tech being used? Is it that the companies are too small? Is it that it's hard to get, big companies to move or to change? So what's the thing that's really stopping the takeoff of this tech at the moment? Is it tech, or is it business, or is it a combination of the two? Up first, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's nice to actually work with small companies doing this tech. Yeah, the big ones are a lot of them trying to bluff their way through it, I think. And we know they need to get the expertise. They need to come to the SMEs, and that's where the expertise is. For me, the expertise is in the universities and the small tech companies that are kind of spun off from universities or have been involved, and they're developing this tech at the moment. So in some sense, it's kind of in like this kind of new novel. We use boarding maps to look at technology, and it's in the kind of new novel, and it's not mature. The product services end. So if you want to use these techniques, you have to custom build something for yourself. You have to not only the technology, you have to build the custom processes. You need to analyze the data. You need to see if you're using the right techniques to use the data. You need to see if you've got the right data. Yeah. And, there's lots of work to be done around that to start with. But, but over the 2 years that I've been looking at this, or 3, I can see that's moving, more into the product services place. So I think, like Cybernetica are probably the most advanced. There's stuff from Dave Archer's company that's out there. But I think, it's just not something you'd put into production yet. It's more for prototyping and experimenting, and that's not because of the technology or the mass behind it. That's because the organization needs to understand how to use these techniques. So it's more about the working practices and the processes to use these techniques. So there's a bit of rigor you need to do to understand your data and the techniques, and to see if your data is suitable for the techniques and the techniques are suitable for the data to get the kind of outputs you want. And I think that's kind of where we are at the moment.
Okay, so that kind of goes back to something that Ram was talking about in our second thing, which is, the companies end up being, you've got to, from the point of view of the technological supplier, they want to not be a POC house. They want to have a repeatable sale, but you actually need the POCs because the big companies, the customers don't really understand the space. They don't really understand, how they could be. So they still want to only kind of like put their foot in the water. So this is kind of like a chicken and an egg situation.
Yeah.
And how do we break that chicken and egg situation so we can move from POCs to a real product and then get scale so the small companies survive and the big companies get the benefit?
Yeah, so my experience with the stats office, one of them tried to develop their own software for this, and it was like, don't do this, you don't have the skills, you don't have the capabilities, you have many capabilities, but you don't have the capabilities in this area, it's very specialist.
We have cryptographers have a phrase, and don't roll your own crypto.
Yes, absolutely.
Like,
absolutely. Never. So when we like 2-3 years ago, it was kind of new and novel. And now I think, from the last couple of talks we've seen, now the compilers are emerging, and now we need to get the developers using the compilers. And then, and I think until we've got the compilers there and we've got developers that understand the compilers, they don't need to be, crypto experts. And then we can get it into more mainstream developer world, and then we'll have a lot, then they'll just create all sorts of software we never even thought was possible with these kind of techniques. And I think, that's okay. Where we need to get to, and we're not far off.
We're not far, that's good. We're not far off. Matt, what do you see as the impediment that's stopping the takeoff in the financial services industry? Because, I could just sit here and I could just, not just in financial crime, but, in credit scoring, you're going to want, banks, especially if you have these small challenger banks coming in, they're going to want to share data. They're not going to be able to build a credit scoring model themselves. So they probably want to share credit scoring models, so there's all sorts of applications, especially, in this new sort of slim banking model that the central banks are trying to push to stop the banks that are too big to fail. So what do you see as the impediments in the financial industry?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things really. Again, the two things I've noticed, and I'm sure there's a whole heap more, but I guess the main one is that the risk involved when it comes to data sharing, whether that's like from a bank's point of view or a financial institution's point of view, what the commercial aspects of that, are they going to start, for instance, sharing more about their own business model, about the customers, or are they going to introduce more risk because they're now getting a whole heap of red flags, but they didn't have red flags before when it comes to money laundering, and then they now have to put more resource into investigate all of that, right? So I think that's like one key thing which is stopping the adoption there, or at least a barrier to it. And then in terms of on the data side as well, there's not really any good place that you can go to is if you're coming in as a small company that's working on pets to try and get access to financial data within a bank. The procurement life cycle is massive, right? So you can sit there for, and I think a lot of the times we've found, at least in the fintech world, that you might have really good idea, you start engaging with an incumbent, and then you start to move along and you start having those conversations, but 18 months later you ran out of money and you have to move on to the next thing, and that all falls apart. So yeah, from a procurement point of view, and this is something we're trying to solve with the digital sandbox, give people access to data which looks like synthetic data of a bank, so we can go to that proof of concept to proof of value, and then you can actually start to say to the bank, hey, we've just tested this in this environment, somewhat similar to your data, and try and shorten at least those procurement life cycles so that then they can go into an incumbent, and then they can actually start to work with real data and prove out some of these technologies.
So perhaps to explain to some of the more academic-minded people on the call, what the sales cycle for an organization like a bank is huge. You'd have a POC, which is what's called a proof of concept, which could take 6 months, sometimes could take a year. And then you actually have to go through the procurement cycle. So your sales from the point of view that when you first contact the bank to sell them some privacy enhancing technology to the final closing could be 2 years, 3 years, if you're lucky. That's if you're lucky, if they buy the thing in the end, and by which time, if you're a startup, you've run out of your venture capital money. So this is a real problem. You're a regulator. Do you see a role for regulators to regulate in this space? I mean, we've seen GDPR put as a regulation, that was a law, but it's also a regulation that puts up a barrier around data. Do you also see a role for regulators or law to enforce companies to data share in a privacy preserving way? To say that actually, for example, in your space, banks have to share data related to fraud so we can track money laundering, or banks have to share data with respect to credit scoring, because otherwise we produce models that are biased towards certain sectors of the population. We now have rules that you can't in the UK, you can't have different insurances between men and women because you have different bias. We know this with machine learning and whatever, that women is biased against women or ethnic minorities or whatever. So do you see regulation as being a driver here? And if so, which regulation?
Yeah, I mean, potentially. I think for something like that, you'd have to start pointing towards some more global, especially when it comes to money laundering. It needs to be almost like a global conversation that has to happen. And I know that, we've got our Global Financial Innovation Network, which is a network of international regulators who you start to discuss some of these technologies. When it comes to actually, I guess, coming up with a policy that says you have to use privacy enhancing tech to actually share information, I think that's probably a long way off in terms of the conversations that need to happen in the policy space. Generally take quite a while to do your call for inputs and all that stuff which goes into that. But saying that, it's not, and it sounds like I'm banging on about digital sandbox quite a bit, and I apologize for that. But
keep going.
we are seeing that as a place where regulators can start having those conversations. So it's not just about giving the tech companies access to the data. It's also about having some of those high level policy conversations as well. Do we bring in that GFIN network into the sandbox so you can start talking about what are some of the barriers to adopting this, and how can we as a group of regulators look to try and change that so that we can actually go out and actually use these technologies to help solve some of these bigger problems. Okay,
cool. So there's a question here which is using things I don't know, so I hope one of you does. Okay, so one question from Derwin is does the National Digital Twin initiatives and the National Data Sharing Consultation mean there's a greater impetus for practical and industry privacy enhancing technologies? But I've never heard of the National Digital Twin Initiative and the National Data Sharing Consultation. So do you know about those?
Yeah, so what I know about, there is a national data, so I think it's on the DCMS, there's a national data strategy being developed. So I think those two probably are part of that, or they may be competing ones because it does happen in government. But I think the answer is yes. They do need to use privacy enhancing techniques to meet the goals that they're looking to achieve. And especially, the work around the safety tech industry, they definitely need privacy enhancing techniques. And, just talking about how do you move it into the proof of value? So, so under the UN, there's the Sustainable Development Goals. So these are the big goals that all members of the UN are committed to. So by 2030, remove poverty from everywhere, protect women and children. So under SDG 5, it's about protecting women and children. And the large donors that support these programs have put, I think it's over 100 million into this dollars in just last year. And 120 million that came to the UK. And that's for other, projects and around protecting women and children. But I think, a significant amount of that could be directed towards the privacy enhancing techniques, and then we really would be able to protect women and children online. Yeah. And then it's, I guess, the value there is protecting the women and children, but also you develop you move the techniques further and advance them more. And you're not in an industry that has a huge amount of inertia to using these techniques, because all the incumbent suppliers in the financial industry, it's not in their interest to use these techniques now, is it? Because so that's
It's always a common. It's always a common. I've always had this thing like the governments like they go, oh, we're going to do an innovation, so we're going to give money to big tech, the incumbent, to do innovation. You go like, no, they're the last people who want innovation because it's going to put them out of business. You want to give it to the person. If you want to create a new Google, you don't give more money to BT.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's the last people you want to give money to create a new Google. Okay, so there's a really cool question here. Okay, so we're talking about regulation. So there are two types of regulation you can have. One which mandates data sharing in some sense and leaves open the tech, and then the other one which is called what's technologically neutral legislation. Regulation, and there's one which actually says you must use this tech. Which ones do you reckon is better to go down the lines of? What are the risks of either approach? Mandating tech, but mandating sharing, but not mandating tech, or mandating tech. So which one do you see? Do you see an advantage or disadvantages?
Yeah, I think I'd see a disadvantage with the mandating tech, because we don't know where the tech's going to be in 5-10 years time, and as I was saying before, policy can be quite slow to adapt. So are we going to mandate tech and then all of a sudden we're going to find 5-10 years that tech has actually changed, it's evolved, it's moved into something else? I think mandating the concept of sharing is probably better than mandating the tech, because you leave that conversation open. And we've, as a regulator, we try to be technology neutral. And that should be our goal. We shouldn't be trying to endorse any particular technologies. But in some sense, by having a tech sprint around privacy enhancing technologies, we have endorsed it in a way, right? Where we said, these are the ones that we want to look into. But I don't think we'd ever go down the road of saying, okay, but now you need to use homomorphic encryption when it comes to sharing KYC information. Okay,
and Mark, what's your view?
Yeah, so I don't, from a government point of view, it's difficult to procure stuff. So any procurement rule would never say that. So. There's some stuff that's ubiquitous that they can say, use TCP/IP, for example, because it's everywhere. And the crypto techs, they're nowhere near that position where they're a standard yet, so anybody can mandate using them. But if you look at some of the other old crypto techniques, TLS or whatever, and that's mandated by NCSE. You must use this for your com. So in the future, it may be that it can be mandated, but not today. And actually, you want to create a market where it's open and flexible, and you encourage new people to come in and develop new technology, and you need to accelerate that movement to developing products and services. And one of the techniques to do that is to open source stuff. So so if the government invested some money in developing some open source software around this, or supported the open source communities, then I think that would help accelerate it, and then we'd end up with more products and services, and eventually we'd be in a position to mandate these kind of techniques, because they.
I think one of the problems here, which someone in the questions is kind of Dan, in fact, in the questions is always Dan with the good questions, has pointed out, is that actually, if we don't specify strong pets, just like we have with normal security, people go. They default to the stupid thing. So we have this notion in GDPR of you know, if you want to protect data, you have to use, you know, the industry best practice. So in some sense, it really does depend on defining, you know, that kind of regulation depends on actually having a notion of what best practice is. And the problem is that in certain use cases at the moment, best practice is pretty crap. And so it's just kind of, how do we, you know, if we have a technologically neutral regulation that depends on a notion of current best practice, how do we move that best practice along? How do we?
Yeah. So, you know, with these techniques, there is no best practice. Yeah. You know, it's not defined. It's not well known. It's not well understood. It's not the way of doing business. You know, you know, we're not anywhere near best practice yet with these techniques. Yeah. You know, it's in the development phases, it's experimenting. And it's, if you want to do some of this, you have to custom build it. Yeah. You know, there are some products and services. You can get some products and services that will help you, but you, as an organization, you still need to understand how you do this internally. You need the skills, the techniques, and the working practices. You know, and then the governance. And one thing we haven't talked about is the ethics. You know, so you know, that's, you could do a whole separate session on that. Yeah, but you know, it's nowhere near best practice at the moment. Yeah.
And just to add, I think the ICO were looking to publish some guidance on pets later this year, but I think it's now been pushed out to next year. Now, that's obviously not mandating what technology you should use, but at least it's giving a bit of an idea where at least the ICO is thinking in terms of pets and what would, I guess, perceived as not best practice, but some that they think are promising.
No, that's kind of cool. Okay, so we're we've got about 10 minutes left, so post your questions if you've got some. So my next question is, so we've got a bunch of pets. We've got homomorphic encryption, multi-party computation, differential privacy. We've got zero knowledge proofs. In some sense, you can kind of think of federated learning a little bit as a pet, but not quite, because it doesn't really, you know, secure stuff. And all of these things are being used at the moment. We've got differential privacy being used in the Census. We've got differential privacy being used by Apple. We've got MPC being used in blockchain a lot. We've got MPC being used to secure keys in things. We've got MPC being used to do databases, both by Galwar in the US and by Cybernetica in Europe. And we've got zero knowledge proofs now rolling out quite massively over the blockchain. Which one of these do you think is the most mature and able to move forward quicker to support privacy in larger applications, from your point of view?
Shall I go first?
Yeah,
go.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, it's probably NPC. Yeah, and I think it has better use cases, and we can see from, if you do go online, look at the research papers, there's lots of research from Microsoft, from Amazon, and other organizations kind of looking at MPC. So I think, MPC, but I'd say, very closely is the homomorphic encryption, but I think they have kind of different use cases. So, we'll have to see. And, I think, there's a lot of interest in federated learning because of what it could deliver. Yeah. So yeah. I think the investment will be in federated learning. Yeah.
You reckon federated learning is where the investment's going to be?
Yeah.
Because AI has more investment than crypto.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's just like, it sounds
cool. It sounds good, Yeah.
But actually, after Christmas, we're going to be talking to investors. So I can put that question exactly to investors. I can say, why the hell are you putting so much money into AI? So Matt, what's your view?
Well, I'm just talking in terms of what I'm seeing as the solutions that are coming out of the tech sprint and what's in the digital sandbox. But a lot of the time, when we're seeing these pets that are being adopted, it's generally around, I think, what Mark's suggesting as well. It always seems like MPCs in there and homomorphic encryption are kind of there at the top. ZK, I do see sometimes where they like it. It's a combination of maybe MPC plus zero knowledge proof, and then they try to use those two different technologies to pull together like a KYC solution.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's where we're seeing, at least in the proof of concept phase, where these technologies are being deployed. The federated learning one's quite interesting because we do see a lot of companies come to us and say that they're using federated learning and they've got investment from XYZ and they wanted to test it out, but it always comes down to the problem of data and actually getting data sets where they can do something like federated learning, especially when it comes to banking data. So yeah, trying to get that data, those data sets out there for any of these technologies, I think is really important to test out whether or not they're useful in the practical sense.
Yeah, I can attest that. So so you kind of like what we've got is we've got a bunch of technologies, and each technology is not a magic bullet in each given situation. It really has to be tailored, and sometimes you might need to use a combination. I mean, we saw that with the Galwar and the database for the US Census. They used what did they use? They used MPC. They used special forms of format preserving encryption, added differential privacy on top. There was they basically just threw everything at it to be able to solve every problem in in space, and still then they're not solving every problem.
And then also you've got a scaling problem as well, right? I mean, technology on top of technologies, then you try to actually put that into the real world. It's like, oh yeah, it works in this really unique use case, but as soon as I try to scale it, it doesn't.
But I think it's kind of interesting. So I was invited down to Portsmouth to one of the national statistic things by Mark and his colleagues a few years ago to talk about the census. And everyone, you think like the census is a massive amount of data. The census is actually really small. If you think about it, it's a form that each household fills in. If you have a population of the United States, there's probably only about 100 million households anyway. So it's a database with 100 million records, and you can't answer many questions. So the total table size is really, really tiny. And I remember a great point where someone said, we want to do multivariate statistics. And I went, oh my God, you can't do that with secure computation because that's like generalized linear models and stuff like that. And they said, no. What we mean is we do a table with 2 rows because it's like, like how many people live in, people in Bristol, people in Manchester with different things. And this was multivariate. Because, aha. And so, a lot of statistics, a lot of stuff that people produce is very descriptive, very simple operations that homomorphic encryption and MPC can cope with. Cool.
And on that note, I think what we hear from the the leading edge of the cryptographers is this stuff, it's really secure, but it's not secure. Maybe you should or shouldn't use it, yeah. But there's from the business point of view, it looks amazing, yeah. And it's like, oh, this is going to fix all my problems, and it needs to be good enough, yeah, because there's always an element of risk. And we need to understand these kind of risk profiles and build them up around these kind of solutions. And there's some kind of like like binary, it's not secure or it is secure, and it's never like that. It's always there's always a risk thing, and I think the cryptographers need to get closer to the business, and the business need to get closer to the cryptographers.
Yeah, exactly. Everything is. I mean, this is poor education of cryptographers. If you do information security, it's all about risk management. Yeah, cryptography reduces your risk. And so reducing your risk, if you can't reduce it to 0, reducing it a half can save shed loads of money on the bottom. Okay, cool. Right, we've got some questions here. All right, so Sophie asked, like last week, we heard a lot of, this is probably more aimed at Matt. So last week, we heard a lot about digital currencies with respect to zero knowledge proofs. Do you see digital currencies both in the like the Bitcoin version and in the nationally banked digital currencies that are being proposed at the moment as a threat or a positive for detecting money laundering? I mean, after all, you can see the blockchain, therefore you can see the money going around. So surely this is a help for money laundering because everything's in the clear.
Exactly. I mean, go on.
No, go on, Matt, you go first.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because as soon as it's on the blockchain, you do have an audit trail, right? And once you've detected that bad actor, or you've detected the network, then you kind of have a pretty good idea about who the other bad actors may be. It's always but it's always that issue of like when it goes to fiat. So you have to try and determine, okay, at the exchange, who are the real actors behind it. So it's kind of needs to work in with the market and also with fiat to go, okay, well, once we've gone from crypto to fiat, or I'm trying to get that money out of the system, that's when you kind of need to detect them. But once you start unraveling the network, yeah, for sure, I think it's probably really useful to have cryptocurrency in the mix. I did try to push it in the tech sprint in 2018, actually, that we should be exploring, looking at the how we can detect money laundering within the crypto.
That's kind of cool. And Mark, off you go.
Well, yeah, I think it's immutable, isn't it? The whole point of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies is you've got a full audit trail of so it's perfect for tracking bad actors, and we know bad actors are using Bitcoin and and other cryptocurrencies today. So it's Yeah, keep on using it, and and this is where I think we'll see regulation come in, Nigel, is around cryptocurrencies. And I wouldn't be surprised if governments start announcing their own. I think China's thinking about one, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see that across
well, I know of the 4 major currencies in the world. I know 2 are looking at a digital form of their currency.
Yeah, and when that happens, there'll be regulations for the new digital currency, but there'll also be regulations that will impact existing currencies because So
Cool. Well, okay, so we're almost at the top of the hour. Mark and Mac, is there anything else you want to add that we haven't covered?
I just got a question for the community. Where do we go to learn this? Where are the people? Where the because when I got involved, Nigel, it was kind of luck that I found you, and you were in Bristol, and you were just 20 minutes away. Yeah. So if I want to get involved in this, if I want to find out more, where do I go? Where's the communities? Where's the?
Oh, well, okay. So brilliant. I'm glad you asked that question, because after Christmas we have Real World Crypto. So Real World Crypto is the place where the real world meets the crypto community. So we have, you have all the big companies there. The talks are not academic. They're deliberately not academic. It's a way for the community to talk, everyone to talk. So if you're interested in this space, in terms of crypto and the real world, you should register for Real World Crypto. Pity it's not in person, because it's always the funnest conference of the year by a long way. So you should register for that. I think that's the week after New Year. So that's coming up. So that would be the first place I would look, just to make some contacts in the space. There's a lot of training material starting coming. I know your organisation is trying to produce some training material. We're at Leuven. We're going to be sometime in the new year going to be putting an online set of videos up explaining MPC. There's a lot of, I know that Rand in Paris is running a bunch of meetups. You should look at the Paris Meetup, which is, of course, obviously no longer in Paris because it's now all virtual. But there's a really good training that they're doing there. And I think they've got some stuff coming up in the new year. They did one a few weeks ago on the training on homomorphic encryption, the library and applications. So there's a lot of stuff coming out there, but you really have to search. If you're looking for companies that want to kind of dip their toe in the space, there's a lot of organizations out there. Previous things, we already talked about the MPC Alliance. We talked about the Zero Knowledge Proof standardization body, and we talked about what was the other one? The homomorphic standardization body. So there's ones we can all go to. Now, what I'm going to do with Jane is at the end of this thing, what we're going to do on the website, we're going to put a bunch of links that people can look at. So they can, for future posterity, but we'll probably curate that over Christmas and then that.
Cool.
Any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mean, I was obviously just going to shamelessly plug the Digital Sandbox again. I've just put in the chat.
Which I just reposted it to everybody. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, I mean, and as I said before, join into Digital Sandbox. You can see some of the companies that are working on privacy enhancing technologies when it comes to solving financial crime or fraud. And we are, I mean, part of that establishing the pilot was also about establishing community around the technologies and the problems that we're trying to solve. So, if anybody wants to get involved, you can message the teams, you can have a look at their work, you can have a look at some of the data sets that we're making available to them. And I was going to say, after the pilot's over as well, we're giving some exclusivity around the data sets in terms of who actually has access to it during the pilot. But then post-pilot, we want to release these synthetic data sets let them go wild and see whether people can actually play with them and come up with other innovative solutions that we haven't thought of. So if anybody's looking to explore some larger, say, banking data sets or SME data, yeah, we'll let people have access to it. And even if you have an academic interest now, we can probably explore about getting early access if people were looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing some stuff in Leuven with some banks and with some central banks, and one of the problems is actually getting data sets that we can actually test stuff going forward. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Matt and Mark. That was really interesting. We'll be creating some links which we'll put on the Newton Gateway page over the next few weeks. Thank you very much, and we'll see everybody after Christmas for where we talk to the investors and see where they're going to put money. Do you want to wish everybody happy Christmas, Jane?
Oh yes, happy Christmas, everybody, and yes, that event on investors' perspectives is on Tuesday, the 19th of January at 10 o'clock in the morning. We will send everybody a reminder in the new year. So I wish you all well for a Christmas and New Year season, and thank you very much, Nigel, Matt, and Mark. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah,
Bye.
Christmas.
all right, cheers.
Bye.
Bye.